Hey, Sarasata here. I'm going to admit something. I'm not ashamed of it, but the word admit is the word we use when we're going to reveal something about ourselves that we know will be perceived negatively. So that's why I say admit. I don't like sad endings. They're coarse and rough and get everywhere, but the real reason I dislike them is because they don't uplift me. In a world where misery is oftentimes the default, and we're all constantly striving against entropy, whether nature against time or we people against our own aversion to work. So, to root for a character for 400 pages to then see him murdered seems like folly. I understand I'm opining here, my feelings are subjective. The upshot is that the story I'm going to read in its entirety was not what I expected when I began reading, but I'm glad I read it anyway. It made me laugh despite its tragedy, and in that way, I guess it's not always bad for a story to have a sad ending. Still, for me, I'll stick to the happily ever afters and the cheerful ambles into the horizon and the setting sun. They make me happy, and it'd be difficult to object with that, I think. Alright, here's the deal. For today's episode, I've got a short story by someone from Reddit named Butt Shrimp, a name at which I giggled fervently, as you'll soon hear. I originally recorded the audio for the episode a few months ago and didn't start making the video until recently. In the interim, the actual text file was lost somewhere. I started to search for it in Google Documents, but it wasn't, apparently, in any Google document I had ever opened. Either that or he deleted it. Next, I went to Reddit and went through my comment history to locate our conversation so I could backtrack to the original thread in which he'd posted the story, which went according to plan, until I reached the thread and saw that he had deleted it. There was only one remaining option, and that was to contact Butt Shrimp himself. I sent him a friendly message asking to be given a copy of the original text for my episode. That was over a week ago, and no response. So, my guess is that he's off doing whatever shrimp do when they're not penning short stories about the depressed. Having done my due diligence in attempting to correct my original mistake of not saving the story to my hard drive, I feel sufficiently vindicated to proceed. Since I don't have any visual for you to read along, I'm happy to announce that today's episode will be a podcast. So, welcome to Loaded Trifle, the third episode in my podcast series in which I read, comment on, and review stories, professional and amateur alike. Enjoy. Alright, this is Selrisatai from Reddit, and I'm going to read and give my commentary on a short story written by the user... I can't. By the user Butt Shrimp. We are all adults here. Alright. A boy too young to be downtrodden. 20 years of age, and his heart was blue enough to turn that night's gray sky black. So we already have an issue in the first sentence, which is nights should have a possessive S there, apostrophe, which it does not. And the second issue is why that night's gray sky? Does it mean the specific night sky that is happening at this exact moment in the story? Or does it mean or does it just mean a night's gray sky? It's a little ambiguous. Heartbreak and misery, a tale too often told. You already got 2 semicolons in here, but I like semicolons and I can kind of see where you're going with it, so I'm not going to criticize that too much. If it happens a lot more, I might have to say something. He sat in his bed that morning, his palms pressed into his eyes. He felt... I kind of like that. It's simple. It doesn't try to over-explain that particular concept. Palms pressed into eyes. He's probably crying. I mean, or he's frustrated or sad. But it shows the emotion pretty well, all by itself. So good job on the minimalism there. He felt the weight of his sorrow behind his eyes. Okay, use the word eyes twice in a very short time ends up making the writing sound a bit clunky. And there's your third semicolon. But they shed no tears this time. You know what? I'm not going to criticize the semicolons. I'm just going to note them. Okay, so that's 3. But they shed no tears this time. Okay, I kind of like that. This time means it's happened before. And it refers back to the pressed his palms, so, it all comes together. He wondered whether one could stop their own heart. I know that there is now appropriate for singular gender neutral, but in this instance, we know the gender, or rather, in this instance, it just would sound more poetic, in my opinion, just to use his. He wondered if one could stop his own heart, right? I mean, and it refers back to him to some degree as well. And there's your fourth semicolon. Will themselves dead. A hypothesis proven false by the attempts he made that fateful morning. Well, but he would continue to try anyway. So he's going to continue to try willing himself dead. The phrasing is a little, I don't know. The phrasing has too much implication that he's actively attempting to murder himself with sheer force of will, to a kind of a silly degree, like he's kind of an ignorant degree, where like as if he truly believes it, right? And it doesn't do the character's intelligence credit. The day folded over. The sun set, and the vastness of night covered the earth. And still he laid in his bed, without a single change of or swing of mood. Okay, that I think of you accidentally put in there, so I think it should be without a single change or swing of mood. Though that whole line, really, that clause is just kind of weirdly worded. I think it should be let's see. Without but his mood didn't improve at all, something like, I don't know. It just it's a little weird the way it is now. I can't readily think of an alternative. For a brief moment, he considered the things he has lost today. You were switched between past tense and present tense. And there's your fifth semicolon. His job, for one. This is the third time this week he was scheduled and was too indisposed to call his boss and report his ailment. Wow, that's really formal to say it like that. It actually kind of reminds me of Japanese translated writing. He supposed this semester was over for him, sixth semicolon, if he hadn't been struggling before. Certainly the 3 tests and 2 midterm papers he missed over the course of a week, or this week, or of that week, had put him in a hole there was no getting out of. And still he laid in bed, 7 semicolon, and couldn't summon any feelings for the life that has fallen apart. You've switched again tenses. Unbeknownst to him, he fell asleep. When you said unbeknownst, I was like, oh, is there what's the secret? What's going on? Unbeknownst to him, there was a secret group of no. Unbeknownst to him, he fell asleep. So presumably you're implying that upon falling asleep, he's going to dream and not realize he's dreaming because he doesn't know he fell asleep. I guess it's a kind of a weird way to say it. He dreamed a dream for the ages that night. What is that supposed to mean? 8th semicolon, he was going to go for a swim. Wow. Talk about a dream for the ages, swimming. Here's a fun fact about this 20-year-old boy, as there aren't too many of them. The phrase, as there aren't too many of them, I get why you wrote it, but it doesn't logically follow the previous clause, so it shouldn't be in this sentence. It should be in a different sentence. Or you should preamble that phrase better so that it transitions from the first part of the first clause into this clause more smoothly or logically. He doesn't know how to swim. He never got around to learning. But alas, he found himself in pools nearly every dream he's dreamed the past few months, and they were all too real. He would drown if he stepped into a pool deep enough in his wakeful hours. Yeah. And then there's a 9th semicolon. And in his sleep, it was much the same. This time, the pool was filthy. It was tinted with a light green hue. There were particles floating about. Soda cans, plastic bags, leaves. The parenthetical addition here suggests that the particles are going to be referenced in the parentheses. However, soda cans, plastic bags, and leaves are not particles. So you made a bad connection, essentially. Also, that you shouldn't need a comma after a parenthetical addition. You pretty much don't need a comma. That you can consider the parentheses as a comma because the reader is going to pause anyway. And the wall of the pool was stained and chipping away. But much like usual, he found himself sinking into the water, and so it went. He woke up midday through his breath. Are we on the 9th semicolon? His chest felt heavy, as if it were full of the water he had drowned in. He felt okay for a moment, as if he had woken up a blank slate. And then he remembered his dream and the heartache. And so he pressed his palms into his eyes. I really like, actually, this callback of pressing palms into his eyes. It's kind of a little bit of a subtle phrase, and now it feels very poetic. You don't say, and so he cried. No, he pressed his palms into his eyes. Very personal. I really like that. And waited for the day to turn into night. When suddenly he found in himself in thought. You mean he found himself in thought. Not in hopeless despair and no longer stuck in the rut. He found him... Wait, what? Him being in thought does not preclude him being in hopeless despair or being in a rut. So phrasing it like this makes it sound like you're saying, well, he's this, right, instead of this. But what you're really saying is he is this, and he's also no longer this, right? He's in thought, but he's also no longer hopeless and despairing. He found himself thinking about this thought. And eventually... Wait, what thought? Oh, the thought. I guess it just... The thought. You didn't really say he was thinking a thought. You were saying he was in thought. So this clause here does not actually properly reference the previous statement. You would have to say he realized a thought or he had a thought. And then you could say he found himself thinking about this thought. And incidentally, some people might say thinking about this thought's kind of repetitive, but I kind of like it's kind of thematic almost. It's a play of words. I kind of like it. And eventually this thought turned to courage, a bit of courage that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to rear itself into the forefront of his being. Rear itself into the forefront of his being is a little bit odd. I think just front of his being would be better. He tossed this feeling around in his gut for a little bit, trying to... Okay, that you're kind of mixing metaphors now, because a feeling in your gut is a metaphor, and then toss something around, like a thought or a feeling, is also a metaphor or a thought. If you toss a thought around or a feeling around, it's also a metaphor. But you're writing he tossed it around in his gut, and that starts coming off as, like, it starts sounding like he had the thought or the feeling in his gut, and he tossed it around within the confines of his gut, right? His physical gut. And that's the impression it gives. So a little weird. Trying to see if it was there to stay. Sure enough, I like this concept of trying to see if it was there to stay. In other words, he gets the feeling, but he's cautious about it staying. It feels good, but of course he's despairing, so he feels like it's not likely that it's going to remain. So I like that he does that. Let's see here. An hour passed, and in the middle of the second, it had yet to go away. So he got out of bed with the enthusiasm of a man who has a purpose. This little thought he had became a mammoth, and inside of him something was stirring. At last he was alive. He strode to his closet with a swelling pride in his chest. His eyes turned red and saturated with tears that had never come before this. I think just stopping at before is good, because when you say this, it suddenly makes it really specific, and it feels like I might be missing something. It feels almost like you're about to say something that, what is this, right? Before just means before this point, right? So this just adds a kind of a layer of specificity that is unintuitively obfuscating. The first thing he did was went inside his wardrobe and took out a belt. He fed the tail through the head and put it in his closet door frame, shutting the door to keep it in place. He grabbed a small stool from the kitchen and brought it to his room under the belt, or rather the news. His name was Merrick Mingo, just a boy of 20 years old. His obituary was vague, and the wake was full. Nobody saw it coming, except Merrick Mingo, and so it went. Well, that got dark really fast, you trickster! Well, there you go, that's my full analysis. And now I'm depressed.